lesson is to review Sherlock Holmes and detective fiction, and also Gothic fiction and Victorian literature. All right, Gothic literature is an example of fantastic fiction, which means fiction that can go beyond the rules of reality. So we're talking magical characters or characters who are larger in life or almost superhuman. Sherlock Holmes doesn't have magical powers, but at times it almost seems like he does. His ability to deduce based on evidence in front of him means that he's able to think and put the puzzles together better than any other character. And it almost seems like he has magical powers at times. He also has very exotic enemies to defeat. Other Gothic characters include Dracula, the Invisible Man, a character who has lost his physical body. And all of this combines romance and horror. It's a genre that attempts to thrill and terrify the reader at the same time. All right, so Sherlock Holmes is, of course, detective fiction. Any crime fiction or characteristics of a detective story needs to have these 6 different characteristics. Okay, so number 1, the story must be centered around a crime that is significant. Mostly for Sherlock Holmes, we're talking about murder, or it could be theft, theft of a grand scale. The detective has to be memorable. He or she must be interesting and unique. So any formula fiction like detective fiction is very character driven. People grow to love these characters, and Sherlock is the classic, a classic figure who is able to solve any crime. Where the police fail, he steps in, and like I said, he's almost superhuman in his abilities. There must be an outstanding opponent. So the criminal in a detective story has to be worthy of your detective. So Sherlock Holmes has a long-running nemesis at Professor Moriarty, and he is at times even able to outwit Sherlock Holmes. But in every Sherlock story, the criminal has to stand a chance against your hero. All suspects of the crime must be introduced early in the detective story. So it should be fun for you to try to figure out who the truly guilty party is. And it wouldn't be playing by the rules to introduce a character at the very end to surprise the reader, because a detective story is a puzzle. So you need all the pieces in order to have the fun of trying to solve the crime yourself. Okay, and all clues to the detective must be available to the reader as well. Again, there's no twist here, something that was covered up from the reader. We stand a chance, just like Sherlock Holmes, of solving the crime. And the solution must be logical and seem possible. There has to be an element of realism to counterbalance all the superhuman qualities and fantastical qualities of a detective story. All right, so Sherlock's powers deduction. Sherlock sees details that most other people miss. He is able to compile those details in his mind in order to reach the most logical conclusion. So by the end of the story, he's usually able to debunk anything that is supposedly supernatural. Usually he finds the reality of the criminal behind the supernatural forces that were going on in the story. So Sherlock is very science-based, and he typically uncovers scams and fraud. And sometimes the scam involves fooling people into believing in ghosts or hellhounds or other fictional creatures. His best friend and partner, Watson, Dr. Watson, is the teller of the story. Watson oftentimes voices the wrong conclusions that Holmes dismisses before Holmes reaches the correct assertion. So Watson is sort of like a sounding board for Sherlock Holmes, somebody who gets proven wrong in every story. And a lot of times Watson is kind of voicing some of the guesses that the reader might have. So it's fun to guess along with Watson. All right, now other characters, like I said, Sherlock Holmes' main partner is Watson. really Watson is the only one who seems to be able to tolerate Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock is not a person who has many friends. He's very antisocial, and Watson is really the only one he seems to get along with. Mrs. Hudson is Sherlock's landlady, and oftentimes she fights with Sherlock over his cleanliness. Sherlock is not a very good tenant. He's dirty. He is self-destructive when he doesn't have a crime to solve. So Mrs. Hudson is sort of a motherly figure, trying to henpeck him into better behavior. Irene Adler is a woman who presents an intellectual challenge to Holmes. In some versions, like movie versions, Irene is given a romantic edge to her, but in the books, Sherlock Holmes is not really interested in women. He's more interested in crime. Okay, and then Professor Moriarty is the criminal mastermind, the nemesis of Holmes. And originally he was created to kill Holmes off in the series. Okay. So there's many different versions of Sherlock Holmes. You may have seen some of these movies or TV shows. People are continuously changing this character, adapting this character to new film versions or television versions. It's a very popular fictional character. All right, so some other details. Sherlock is intellectual but antisocial. He is only interested in solving the puzzle of a crime. He's not really interested in participating in society for any other reason. Sherlock is, in fact, only happy when he has a terrible crime to solve. So he's a creature of the city. The city thrills him and excites him, and the possibility of crime is really what keeps his mind busy. Whereas most people detest the crime and the filth of London streets, Sherlock is very excited by it, a creature of the city. Sherlock uses cocaine and morphine to occupy his mind when he does not have a case to solve. The drug use in the original stories is just there to point out the fact that Sherlock's mind needs to be exercised. He needs that puzzle to solve. And so the cocaine and the drugs are only there to symbolize that he simply can't exist unless his mind is occupied in some way. Okay, Sherlock is also physically strong. He often comes to blows with criminals, and he is very good at catching them. Certainly, he is not the intellectual weakling that some people sort of assume that Sherlock might be. He's actually in the books kind of a superhero. The supernatural is present in these stories, but only as a device. Sherlock always reveals the true scientific cause of events, debunking the supernatural premise of the story. So, like I said, it has elements of the supernatural, but always debunked at the end for a logical scientific reason by Sherlock.